At my son's wedding, his bride made a toast mocking me as a useless old woman in front of 260 guests. I said nothing, walked calmly to the stage with a suitcase, opened it, and showed what she had done the night before. She started screaming, "I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached." I never imagined that the happiest day of my son's life would become the most humiliating moment of mine. But there I was, sitting at table 12 in the back corner of the grand ballroom, watching my daughter-in-law Marin command the microphone like she owned the world. The wedding had been everything Terrence dreamed of. 260 guests filled the elegant venue, crystal chandeliers casting warm light over tables draped in ivory silk. I had helped pay for half of it, though Marin made sure no one knew that detail. To everyone else, this was her family's generous gift to the young couple. I smoothed my navy dress and tried to focus on my son's radiant smile. At 32, Terrence looked so much like his father at that age it made my chest tight. He deserved this happiness. He deserved love. I just wished he had found it with someone else. Marin stepped up to the microphone, her blonde hair perfectly styled in an elaborate updo that probably cost more than my monthly Social Security check. Her wedding dress, a confection of imported lace and pearls, hugged her model thin figure. She was undeniably beautiful, and she knew it. "Thank you all for being here to celebrate this magical day with Terrence and me," she began, her voice carrying easily across the silent room. "I want to take a moment to thank the people who made this possible." She thanked her parents, glowing with pride as they beamed from the head table. She thanked her bridesmaids, her wedding planner, even the florist. Each acknowledgement was met with warm applause and knowing smiles. Then her gaze found me in the back corner. And of course, I must mention Terrence's mother, Alberta. The way she said my name made it sound like something distasteful she had to spit out. "She's sitting back there somewhere." 260 pairs of eyes turned toward me. I felt my cheeks burn as conversation stopped and forks paused halfway to mouths. "Alberta has been quite the presence in our lives," Marin continued, her smile never wavering even as her words turned sharp. "She's taught me so much about what kind of mother-in-law I never want to become." A few uncomfortable chuckles rippled through the crowd. I gripped my napkin under the table, my knuckles white. You see, Alberta represents everything from the old generation that we're trying to move past. She's controlling, she's bitter, and frankly, she's become quite the useless old woman who just can't accept that her little boy has grown up. The silence that followed was deafening. I could feel the shock radiating from the guests, the secondhand embarrassment, the whispered, "Did she really just say that?" But Marin wasn't finished. "So here's to leaving behind toxic family members who serve no purpose except to drag us down. Here's to moving forward without dead weight. And here's to Terrence finally being free from his mother's manipulative grip." She raised her champagne glass high, that beautiful smile still plastered on her face. "Cheers to new beginnings." The response was scattered and uncertain. Some guests raised their glasses out of pure confusion. Others sat frozen in their seats. I watched my son's face drain of color as he stared at his new wife in horror. Every instinct told me to run, to slip out the back door and disappear into the parking lot, to cry in my car like I had so many times over the past 2 years as Marin systematically destroyed my relationship with my only child. That's what the old Alberta would have done. But I wasn't the same woman who had let people walk over her for 70 years. Instead, I stood up slowly, the legs of my chair scraping against the marble floor. The sound echoed through the stunned silence like a gunshot. Every head in the room turned toward me again, but this time I didn't shrink under their gaze. I reached under my table and retrieved the small black suitcase I had brought with me. It was old, battered from years of use, with brass corners that had dulled with age. My fingers wrapped around the worn leather handle, and I felt a strange calm settle over me. Without a word, I began walking toward the front of the room. My low heels clicked against the floor in a steady rhythm that seemed impossibly loud in the absolute silence. I passed table after table of wide-eyed guests, their mouths slightly open, their champagne glasses forgotten in their hands. Marin's confident smile faltered as she watched me approach. She took a small step back from the microphone, her grip tightening on her bouquet. "Alberta, what are you doing?" Terrence's voice cracked as he stood up from the head table. I didn't answer him. I couldn't trust my voice yet. Instead, I climbed the 3 steps onto the small stage where the band had been playing earlier. The microphone stand was still there, waiting. I set my suitcase down on the white tablecloth beside the elaborate wedding cake, the sound of it landing causing several people to jump. Marin's eyes were fixed on it like it might explode. "Marin," I said, my voice surprisingly steady as it carried through the microphone. "You called me useless. You called me dead weight. You said I serve no purpose." The room was so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. Somewhere in the back, a server stopped clearing plates to stare. "But you see, dear, the thing about being 70 years old is that you learn to pay attention. You learn to notice things. And over the past year, I've noticed quite a few interesting things about you." I placed my hand on top of the suitcase, feeling the metal latches under my palm. "Things that I think your new husband should know about. Things that I think all these lovely guests should know about." I paused, letting my gaze sweep across the room before landing back on Marin's increasingly pale face. "Things about what you were doing last night while your future husband was at his bachelor party." Marin's bouquet trembled in her hands. "You're a crazy old woman," she whispered, but the microphone picked it up anyway. I smiled then, the first genuine smile I'd felt in months. "Perhaps. But I'm a crazy old woman with excellent eyesight and very good friends in low places." My fingers moved to the first latch of the suitcase. The metallic click as it opened seemed to echo forever. "Shall we see what I've discovered?" The suitcase opened with a soft whoosh, revealing neat stacks of photographs and documents I had organized with the precision of someone who had spent months preparing for this exact moment. The top layer contained 8x10 color photographs that I had printed at the drugstore just that morning. I picked up the first photograph and held it high enough for the room to see. Even from a distance, the image was clear. Marin in a passionate embrace with a dark-haired man who definitely wasn't my son. They were standing in the doorway of the Marriott downtown, her hands tangled in his hair, his lips pressed against her neck. The collective gasp from the wedding guests sounded like air being sucked out of the room. Several women covered their mouths with their hands. I heard someone's chair scrape back, followed by hurried footsteps toward the exit. "This was taken last night at 11:47 p.m., I announced, my voice carrying clearly through the microphone. "Approximately 3 hours after you told my son you needed to go home early because you had a headache and wanted to be rested for your wedding day." Marin's face had gone completely white. The bouquet slipped from her hands and hit the floor with a soft thud, white roses scattering across the stage. You can't. How did you?" I set down the first photograph and picked up the second one. This time it showed Marin and the same man walking hand in hand toward the hotel elevator, her head thrown back in laughter. She was wearing the little black dress I had complimented her on earlier that week, the one she said she was saving for a special occasion. "This is Marcus Davidson," I continued, as calmly as if I were reading a grocery list. "He's a real estate developer from Phoenix. Married, 3 children. He and Marin have been seeing each other for the past 8 months. Terrence finally found his voice. "Mom, what is this? What are you doing?" His face was a mixture of confusion and dawning horror as he stared at the photographs. I looked at my son, this man I had raised and loved and worried about for 32 years. He deserved to know the truth, even if it shattered him. "I'm showing you who you really married, sweetheart." I picked up the third photograph. This one was even more damning. Marin and Marcus in what was clearly a hotel room, the curtains open just enough for my telephoto lens to capture them in an intimate moment. I had felt sick taking it, but I knew words alone wouldn't be enough. "Marin, please tell me this isn't real," Terrence whispered, his voice breaking. "Tell me this is some kind of mistake." Marin's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Finally, she found her voice. "She's trying to ruin us. This is fake. She probably hired some actor to." "Oh, my dear," I interrupted, reaching back into the suitcase. "We're just getting started." I pulled out a manila folder thick with printed emails and text messages. My neighbor's grandson, a computer-savvy young man named Danny, had been very helpful in recovering deleted messages from Marin's phone after she carelessly left it unlocked during a family dinner. "These are text messages between you and Marcus," I said, opening the folder. "Would you like me to read some of them aloud? They're quite explicit." "No." Marin lunged toward me, but her elaborate dress and heels made her clumsy. She stumbled, catching herself on the edge of the cake table. "You had no right! You violated my privacy!" I stepped back, keeping the folder out of her reach. "Privacy? You gave up your right to privacy the moment you decided to lie to my son and use him for his money while entertaining yourself with another man." The room erupted in whispers. I could see guests pulling out their phones, some recording the scene, others frantically texting. The mother of the bride had her face buried in her hands, while the father sat rigid in his chair, his jaw clenched tight. "Let me read just one message," I said, adjusting my reading glasses. "From 3 days ago, Marin to Marcus. Can't wait for this wedding circus to be over. T is so boring in bed, but his trust fund makes up for it. 2 more years and I can file for divorce with enough alimony to keep us both comfortable. Then we can finally be together openly." The sound Terrence made was barely human. It was a wounded animal noise that cut straight through my heart. He sank back into his chair, his hands covering his face. Marin spun around to face the guests, her composure completely shattered. "She's lying. She made this up. She's always hated me because she's a jealous, bitter old hag who can't stand that her son chose me over her." "Did I make up the hotel receipts too?" I asked mildly, pulling out another stack of papers. "You've been quite generous with Marcus, haven't you? Expensive dinners, weekend getaways, even bought him a Rolex last month. All charged to the credit card that my son pays for." I held up a receipt from Tiffany & Co., $2,400 for a man's watch. "The same day you told Terrence you couldn't afford to contribute to the wedding flowers." More gasps from the crowd. Someone's wine glass shattered as it hit the floor. I could see several guests at the back tables gathering their purses and heading for the exits, clearly uncomfortable being witnesses to this public destruction. Marin's father stood up abruptly. "Marin, is this true?" His voice boomed across the room, filled with a father's rage and humiliation. "Daddy, no. She's making it all up. You know how crazy she is." But even as she protested, I could see the doubt creeping into her father's eyes. He had always been protective of his daughter, but he was also a businessman who valued honesty above all else. I reached back into the suitcase one more time. "There's more, Marin. So much more. Did you really think I wouldn't notice when you started asking Terrence to change his will? When you suggested he transfer ownership of his grandmother's house to your name? When you convinced him to invest in that fake company Marcus told you about?" Terrence's head snapped up. "What company?" "Marin, you said that was your brother's startup." "It was!" she shrieked, but her voice cracked on the words. "It is!" I pulled out a business registration document and held it up. "Marcus Davidson Development, LLC, incorporated 6 months ago in Nevada. No actual business address, no employees, no assets. Just a shell company designed to funnel money from my son to your boyfriend." The room was in chaos now. Guests were talking loudly, some standing up to get a better view, others heading for the doors. The wedding photographer had stopped taking pictures and was staring in shock. Even the servers had abandoned their duties to watch the drama unfold. But through it all, I kept my eyes on Marin. She looked like a cornered animal, her perfect makeup smeared with tears, her elaborately styled hair coming loose from its pins. "You don't understand," she said, her voice desperate now. "This isn't what it looks like. There are things you don't know, things about Terrence that—" "Stop." My voice cut through her babbling like a knife. "Just stop lying. We all know what this is. The question is, how much more humiliation are you willing to endure before you accept that it's over?" I closed the folder and placed it back in the suitcase, but I didn't close the case. Instead, I rested my hand on another stack of documents, thicker than the first. "Because Marin, my dear, what I've shown them so far, this is just the appetizer. The real feast is still to come." The silence that followed my words was broken only by the sound of Marin's ragged breathing and the distant clatter of dishes from the kitchen. I could feel the weight of 260 pairs of eyes on me, waiting. Even the waitstaff had stopped pretending to work and were openly staring at the drama unfolding on the stage. I reached deeper into the suitcase and pulled out a small velvet jewelry box, the kind that holds precious family heirlooms. My fingers trembled slightly as I opened it, revealing the empty silk interior where my grandmother's sapphire necklace should have been resting. This box used to contain a necklace that belonged to my grandmother, then my mother, and then me, I said, holding it up so everyone could see the vacant space. It was valued at $12,000 when I had it appraised 5 years ago. It was supposed to go to Terrence's future wife on their wedding day. Terrence looked confused. Mom, you never mentioned a necklace. I thought you were going to give Marin your pearl earrings. I was going to give her the necklace as a surprise, I replied, my voice steady despite the rage building in my chest. Until I discovered it was missing from my jewelry box 3 months ago. Marin's face, already pale, somehow managed to drain of even more color. She took a step backward, bumping into the elaborate wedding cake display. At first I thought I had misplaced it, I continued. You know how it is when you get older. You start doubting your own memory. I searched my entire house twice, went through every drawer, every box. I even contacted my insurance company to see if it had been stolen during a break-in I didn't know about. I pulled out a manila folder and opened it to reveal a police report. But then I remembered that Marin had been alone in my house the weekend Terrence went to that business conference in Seattle. She had offered to check on me when I had that terrible flu. So thoughtful of her. You're insane, Marin whispered, but her voice lacked conviction. I would never steal from you. Wouldn't you? I asked, pulling out another document. This is a pawn shop receipt from Morrison's on 5th Street, dated 3 months and 2 days ago. One antique sapphire necklace, sold for $3,500. The seller's ID was copied, and thankfully, Morrison keeps excellent records. I held up a photocopy of Marin's driver's license. Several guests gasped, and I heard someone mutter, "Oh my God," from the back of the room. Terrence shot to his feet so fast his chair toppled backward. Marin, tell me this isn't true. Tell me you didn't steal from my mother. She's lying, Marin shrieked, but her voice was shrill with panic now. She's making all of this up because she's a bitter old woman who can't stand that I took her precious little boy away from her. Am I making up this too? I asked, pulling out a second pawn shop receipt. Your grandmother's wedding ring, Terrence. The one I showed Marin when she admired it last Christmas. The one I told her would be passed down to your wife someday. Pawned 2 weeks after she saw it. The sound that came from my son was heartbreaking. He sank back into his chair, his hands covering his face. The ring was supposed to be for our future daughter, he whispered. You said it was safe in your jewelry box. It was safe, I said softly. Until someone with a spare key to my house decided it was worth more as cash than as a family heirloom. I reached into the suitcase again, this time pulling out a thick folder that made Marin's eyes widen with terror. But the jewelry was just the beginning, wasn't it, Marin? Because when a few $1,000s wasn't enough to keep Marcus happy, you needed a bigger score. Stop, Marin begged, tears streaming down her face. Please, just stop. This is a forged deed, I announced, holding up an official-looking document. For my house. The house that's been in my family for 43 years. According to this document, I signed my property over to you last month as an early wedding gift. The gasps from the crowd were audible now. Several people stood up to get a better look, and I heard someone near the back say, "Call the police." The signature is quite good, I continued, examining the document. You must have practiced for hours. But you made one crucial mistake. You dated it for a day when I was in the hospital having my hip surgery. The day you volunteered to house sit for me while I was recovering. Terrence's face was white with shock. You forged Mom's signature? On a deed? Marin, that's a felony. It's not what you think, Marin cried desperately. I was just trying to help. Your mother is getting older, and I thought if the house was in my name, I could make sure she was taken care of. By selling it? I interrupted, pulling out yet another document. This is a listing agreement with Westside Realty. You were planning to put my house on the market next week, while Terrence and I were on your honeymoon. The asking price was $450,000. The room erupted in angry murmurs. Marin's own mother was staring at her daughter in horror, her hand pressed to her chest as if she were having trouble breathing. The plan was brilliant, really, I said, my voice taking on an almost conversational tone. Sell my house while I was supposedly on vacation with you two? By the time I found out, the sale would be final. You would claim I had agreed to it but forgot due to my age. Who would believe a confused old woman over a young, respectable married couple? That's not. I would never. Marin's protests were growing weaker, less convincing. Wouldn't you? I asked, pulling out one final document from the folder. This is a power of attorney form, also forged with my signature. It gives you complete control over my finances, my property, and my medical decisions, dated the same day as the deed. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the kitchen staff had stopped working and were peering out from behind the service doors. Terrence stood up slowly, his face a mask of hurt and disbelief. You were going to steal everything from my mother. Everything. She's an old woman, Marin screamed, her composure completely shattered now. She's going to die soon anyway. Why should she hoard all that money when we could use it to build a life together? The collective intake of breath from the wedding guests was audible. Several people started talking at once, their voices rising in indignation. Marin's father buried his face in his hands while her mother began to sob quietly. And there it is, I said calmly into the microphone. The truth at last. You didn't marry my son for love, Marin. You married him to get access to an elderly woman you could rob and manipulate. You saw me as nothing more than an obstacle to be removed. I closed the folder and placed it back in the suitcase, but my hand lingered on one final stack of papers beneath it. But you know what the truly tragic part is, Marin? All of this scheming, all of this planning, all of these crimes you committed. I paused, letting the tension build as I looked directly into her terrified eyes. You did it all for money that was never going to be yours anyway. Because there's something else you don't know about me, something that makes all of your efforts completely pointless. Marin's legs seemed to give out beneath her. She sank into a chair at the head table, her elaborate wedding dress pooling around her like spilled cream. What are you talking about? She whispered. I smiled, and for the first time all evening it reached my eyes. Oh, my dear girl, we're not even close to finished yet. I reached into the deepest section of my suitcase and pulled out a thick manila envelope that had been resting at the bottom, waiting for this moment. The envelope was worn from handling, filled with documents I had been collecting for months. Each piece of paper inside represented another lie, another manipulation, another betrayal. Marin has been very busy these past 2 years, I announced to the stunned wedding guests. Not just stealing from me and cheating on my son, but systematically destroying the relationship between Terrence and me. And she's been quite clever about it. I opened the envelope and pulled out a series of printed emails. These are messages Marin sent to family members, friends, and colleagues, all designed to paint me as an unstable, demanding mother who was interfering in their relationship. Terrence looked up from his hands, confusion replacing some of the devastation on his face. What messages? Let me read you one, I said, adjusting my glasses. This is an email Marin sent to your cousin Jennifer last Christmas. I'm so worried about Terrence. His mother has become increasingly controlling and paranoid. She calls us 20 times a day, shows up unannounced, and throws tantrums when we try to set boundaries. I think she might be developing dementia, but Terrence refuses to see it because he feels guilty. I'm trying to protect him, but it's putting a strain on our relationship. A gasp escaped from someone in the crowd. I recognized Jennifer's voice, and when I looked toward the back of the room, I could see her standing with her mouth open in shock. Marin, Terrence said slowly, you told me Jennifer had said something about Mom being too clingy. You said the whole family was talking about it. I was protecting you, Marin cried desperately. She was suffocating us. She was trying to control our lives. Was I asked, pulling out another email. This one went to your boss, Terrence. I'm sorry to bother you, but I wanted you to know that Terrence's mother has been calling your office repeatedly, trying to get information about his work schedule and travel plans. She's become obsessed with monitoring his whereabouts. I've tried to handle this quietly, but I'm concerned it might affect his professional reputation. Could you please let me know if she contacts you again? Terrence's face went white. You told Mr. Peterson that Mom was harassing the office? That's why he started treating me differently last year. I thought I had done something wrong. And this one, I continued, pulling out another printed email, went to our family doctor. I'm writing to express concerns about Alberta Whitman's mental state. She's been making wild accusations about family members, claiming people are stealing from her and plotting against her. Her son is too devoted to see how unstable she's become. I think she needs a psychiatric evaluation, but I'm not sure how to proceed without damaging my relationship with her son. Dr. Harrison, who was sitting at table 15 with his wife, stood up abruptly. Marin, you sent me that email? I asked Alberta to come in for cognitive testing because of your concerns. I spent weeks worried about her mental health. You made our family doctor think I was losing my mind, I said, my voice steady, but filled with quiet fury. You created a paper trail of my supposed mental decline, all while you were actually stealing from me and planning to have me declared incompetent. The pieces were falling into place now, and I could see the horror dawning on Terrence's face as he realized the scope of Marin's manipulation. She isolated you from me systematically, I continued, pulling out more documents. Every canceled dinner was because she convinced you I was upset about something trivial. Every missed phone call was because she told you I was angry. Every family gathering I didn't attend was because she said I had complained about the other guests. That's not true, Marin protested weakly. But even she seemed to know it was over. Isn't it? I asked, pulling out a small notebook. This is my daily journal, Terrence. I've been writing in it every day for the past 3 years, documenting every interaction I had with both of you. Would you like me to read some entries? I opened to a page marked with a yellow sticky note. March 15th, last year. Terrence called to cancel Sunday dinner. He said I had called Marin a gold digger at Sarah's birthday party and hurt her feelings. I never said any such thing. I barely spoke to Marin at the party because she spent the entire time on her phone. I tried to explain this to Terrence, but he said Marin was too upset to talk about it. Terrence's Aunt Sarah stood up from her table. Alberta, you were nothing but polite to Marin at my party. I remember because I was impressed by how gracious you were, especially since she ignored everyone there. May 22nd, I continued reading. Terrence says I'm being too pushy about wanting to spend time with them. Marin told him I called her selfish for wanting to spend their anniversary alone instead of having dinner with me. I never called about their anniversary. I didn't even know what day it was. June 3rd. Marin told Terrence I criticized her cooking when they brought me dinner after my surgery. I thanked her 3 times and told her it was delicious. I even asked for the recipe. With each entry I read, Terrence seemed to shrink further into his chair. The realization of how thoroughly he had been manipulated was written all over his face. She created a fictional version of me, I said, closing the journal. A bitter, intrusive, critical mother who made their lives miserable, and every time you started to doubt her stories, Terrence, she would create a new crisis to distract you. I pulled out a medical record from the envelope, like the time she claimed to have food poisoning from my Thanksgiving dinner. The same dinner where she barely touched her plate because she was texting Marcus under the table. The emergency room report shows she was perfectly healthy that night. Or the time she said I had fallen and hit my head, and that's why I was acting confused about her borrowing my car without asking, I continued, producing another document. She called you in a panic, saying I needed medical attention. But my medical records show I was never treated for any fall or head injury. Marin's breathing was becoming rapid and shallow. She looked like she might faint at any moment. She manufactured crises to make you feel like you had to choose between her and me, I said to Terrence. And every time, she made sure I was the problem that needed to be solved. I reached back into the envelope one more time and pulled out a stack of photographs. But perhaps the most cruel manipulation of all was this. I held up a photo of Marin and me at last year's Mother's Day brunch, both of us smiling at the camera. This picture was taken at Romano's restaurant on Mother's Day. I paid for the meal, as I always did. Marin posted this on social media with the caption, "Treating my difficult mother-in-law to brunch, even though she's been criticizing everything I do lately. Sometimes you have to be the bigger person." I showed the photo to the room, then pulled out a printed screenshot of the social media post. 47 comments from people sympathizing with her for having to deal with such a demanding mother-in-law. People who had never met me were calling me ungrateful and suggesting that Terrence should set firmer boundaries with his mother. "You turned my own community against me," I said, my voice quiet but carrying clearly through the microphone. People I had known for decades started looking at me with pity or disapproval because of the stories you were spreading. Terrence finally found his voice. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I believed her. Every time she told me you had said something hurtful or done something inappropriate, I believed her. Why wouldn't you?" I asked gently. "She was your wife. You trusted her, and she was very, very good at lying." I folded the documents and placed them back in the envelope, but I kept one final piece of paper in my hand. "But there's one more thing, Marin. One lie that's bigger than all the others combined." Marin looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes, mascara streaked down her cheeks. "What are you talking about?" I held up the single sheet of paper, and even from a distance, the official letterhead was visible. "This is a letter from the law firm of Patterson, Webb & Associates. It's dated 6 months ago, and it's addressed to me." The room fell silent again, everyone straining to hear what new revelation was coming. "It's about my will, Marin. The will you convinced Terrence I should update to include you as a beneficiary. The will you thought would make you rich when I died." I paused, looking directly at her terrified face. "Would you like to know what you would have inherited?" I held the letter from Patterson, Webb, and Associates high enough for everyone to see, watching as Marin's face cycled through confusion, fear, and dawning horror. The wedding guests had given up any pretense of politeness now. They were openly staring, many of them recording with their phones, all of them waiting for the final blow to fall. "You see, Marin," I said, my voice carrying easily through the silent ballroom, 6 months ago, after you convinced Terrence that I should update my will to include you, I did exactly what you suggested. I went to see my lawyers." Terrence looked between us, still trying to process everything that had been revealed. "Mom, you never told me you changed your will." "That's because I didn't change it the way Marin expected," I replied, unfolding the letter. "I had my lawyers do a complete investigation of my finances, my assets, and my debts, something I probably should have done years ago." I cleared my throat and began to read. "Dear Mrs. Whitman, after completing our comprehensive review of your financial situation, we regret to inform you that your estate is currently worth -$47,000. The gasp that went through the room was audible. Even the servers who had been pretending to clean tables stopped what they were doing. "You see," I continued, "what none of you knew is that I've been living off credit cards and loans for the past 5 years. The house you thought was worth $450,000, Marin. It has a mortgage balance of $390,000. My monthly Social Security barely covers the interest payments." Marin's mouth fell open. "That's impossible. Terrence said you had money saved. He said you owned the house outright." "I did own it outright," I said sadly, looking at my son. "Until I mortgaged it to help pay for your wedding, your car payments, and all those emergencies you two seem to have every month. The vacation to Europe last year? That was $23,000 charged to my home equity line of credit." Terrence buried his face in his hands. "Mom, why didn't you tell me? I never would have asked you to." "You didn't ask," I said gently. "Marin asked, and she made it sound like temporary loans that you would pay back once your business took off. Except your business is doing fine, isn't it, Terrence? You could have afforded those things yourself." I pulled out a bank statement from my purse. "This is my checking account balance as of yesterday morning. $347. That's everything I have left in the world." The silence was deafening. Marin looked like she had been slapped. All her scheming, all her manipulation, all her crimes had been for an inheritance that didn't exist. "But that's not the best part," I continued, reaching back into my suitcase one final time. Because while I was at the lawyer's office, I asked them to do something else for me. I asked them to investigate you, Marin. I pulled out a thick folder marked Confidential Investigation Report and opened it with deliberate slowness. It seems you've been a very busy girl these past few years, much busier than any of us realized. Marin tried to stand up, but her legs seemed to give out beneath her. She collapsed back into her chair, her elaborate wedding dress bunched around her like a deflated balloon. "Should I start with your previous marriage?" I asked conversationally. "The one you forgot to mention to Terrence? You were married to a gentleman named Robert Chen from 2018 to 2020, divorced for irreconcilable differences, though the court records show it was actually because you emptied his bank accounts and disappeared." The collective gasp from the wedding guests was so loud it echoed off the ballroom walls. Terrence's head snapped up, his eyes wide with shock. "You were married before?" he whispered. "Marin, you told me I was your first husband." "Or perhaps we should discuss your criminal record," I continued, flipping through the pages of the report. 3 counts of check fraud in Nevada, 2 counts of identity theft in California. And my personal favorite, a conviction for elder abuse in Oregon, where you convinced an 80-year-old woman to sign over her pension checks to you. Marin's breathing was coming in short, panicked gasps now. Several wedding guests were on their phones, and I could hear someone saying, "Yes, I'd like to report a crime in progress." "The Oregon case is particularly interesting," I said, still reading from the report. "Because the victim was suffering from early-stage dementia, and you convinced her family that you were a certified caregiver. Sound familiar?" I looked up from the report to meet Marin's terrified eyes. "That's what you were planning for me, wasn't it? You were going to have me declared mentally incompetent, get yourself appointed as my guardian, and then systematically drain every penny I had while I was locked away in some nursing home." "That's not true!" Marin shrieked, but her voice was weak and desperate. "You're making all of this up. You're a crazy old woman and everyone knows it." "Am I making up this warrant for your arrest?" I asked, pulling out an official document. "The state of Oregon has been looking for you for 18 months, Marin. They're very interested in talking to you about what happened to Mrs. Dorothy Patterson's life savings." Terrence stood up so abruptly that his chair fell over backward with a crash. "You're a fugitive? You're wanted by the police?" "It's all lies!" Marin screamed, pointing at me with a shaking finger. "She's trying to destroy me because she can't stand that I took her precious son away from her." "Actually," said a calm voice from the back of the room, "she's telling the truth." Every head in the ballroom turned toward the entrance where 2 police officers were walking through the doors. The taller one, a woman with gray hair and a no-nonsense expression, was holding what looked like an arrest warrant. "Marin Elizabeth Davidson," the officer announced, "also known as Marin Chen, also known as Marin Roberts. You're under arrest for violations of your parole agreement with the state of Oregon." The room erupted in chaos. Wedding guests were standing up, talking loudly, some heading for the exits while others pressed closer to get a better view. Marin tried to run, but her elaborate dress and heels made it impossible. She made it 3 steps before stumbling and falling to her knees, her veil tangling around her arms like restraints. "You don't understand," she sobbed as the police officers approached her. "I love him. I really do love Terrence. Everything I did was for us." The female officer helped Marin to her feet with professional efficiency. "Ma'am, you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." As they read her rights, Marin turned to look at Terrence one last time. Her carefully applied makeup was streaked with tears, her perfect hair had come loose from its pins, and her designer wedding dress was stained with champagne and tears. "Terrence, please," she begged. "Don't let them do this to me. I'm your wife. We just got married." But Terrence wasn't looking at her anymore. He was staring at me with a mixture of gratitude and shame that broke my heart. "Actually," said the second police officer, a younger man with kind eyes, "according to the state of Oregon, she was already married when she entered into this ceremony, which makes today's wedding legally invalid." The words hit Terrence like a physical blow. He sank back into his chair, all the fight going out of him. As the police led Marin away in handcuffs, her sobs echoing through the ballroom, I finally allowed myself to feel the exhaustion that had been building for months. I closed my suitcase with hands that trembled only slightly and looked out at the sea of shocked faces staring back at me. "I believe," I said into the microphone, my voice carrying clearly through the chaos, "that concludes this evening's entertainment." I picked up my suitcase and walked slowly off the stage, my low heels clicking against the marble floor with the same steady rhythm they had when I first approached. But this time, I wasn't walking toward a confrontation. I was walking toward freedom. 3 weeks later, I sat in my small kitchen, morning sunlight streaming through the curtains I had sewn myself 40 years ago. The house was quiet, except for the gentle tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway and the soft bubbling of coffee brewing on the stove. For the first time in 2 years, the silence felt peaceful instead of lonely. The aftermath of the wedding had been swift and thorough. Marin was extradited to Oregon within 72 hours, her bail denied due to her history of fleeing across state lines. The local newspaper had run a small story about the arrest, but thankfully they had focused on the legal aspects rather than the family drama that had preceded it. Terrence had moved back into his apartment downtown the day after the wedding. He hadn't been able to face staying in the house he had shared with Marin, surrounded by reminders of the lies she had woven around their entire relationship. He visited me every few days now, usually bringing groceries or offering to help with small repairs around the house. Our conversations were still careful, tentative. 2 years of manipulation and mistrust don't disappear overnight, even when the source of the poison has been removed. But yesterday he had brought me a cup of coffee and sat at this same kitchen table for 2 hours, just talking. Not about Marin, not about the wedding. Just talking about his work, his friends, the book he was reading. Normal conversation between a mother and son who were learning to trust each other again. The doorbell rang, interrupting my quiet morning reflection. I wasn't expecting anyone, but these days, unexpected visitors didn't fill me with the same dread they once had. I knew it wouldn't be Marin demanding entry with some new manipulation or crisis. When I opened the door, I found Detective Sarah Collins, the police officer who had arrested Marin at the wedding. She was holding a manila envelope and wearing the same professional expression she had worn that night. "Mrs. Whitman," she said with a slight smile, "I hope you don't mind me stopping by. I have some news about your case." So I invited her in and offered coffee, which she accepted gratefully. We sat at my kitchen table, the same place where I had planned my confrontation with Marin all those months ago. "First," Detective Collins said, opening her envelope, "I wanted to return these to you." She pulled out my grandmother's sapphire necklace and my mother's wedding ring, both carefully wrapped in tissue paper. We were able to recover them from the pawn shop. The owner was very cooperative once we explained the situation. My hands trembled as I unwrapped the necklace, feeling the weight of the sapphires against my palm. I had thought these family treasures were lost forever. "Thank you," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. "I never expected to see them again. There's more," Detective Collins continued. "The forged documents you provided were excellent evidence. Marin has been charged with multiple felonies in addition to the Oregon warrant. Her lawyer is recommending that she accept a plea deal rather than go to trial." She pulled out another document. "Part of that plea deal includes full restitution for everything she stole from you. The pawnshop money, the costs of the investigation, even compensation for the emotional distress she caused." I looked at the figure written on the paper and blinked in surprise. $15,000? But I only lost about $4,000 in the pawnshops. The DA's office felt that the psychological manipulation and attempted fraud warranted additional compensation, Detective Collins explained. "It's not a fortune, but it should help with some of your financial difficulties." Financial difficulties. Such a polite way to describe being broke at 70 years old, because I had tried too hard to buy my son's love and approval. "What about Marcus?" I asked. "The man she was having an affair with?" Detective Collins smiled grimly. "Turns out Mr. Davidson has some legal troubles of his own now. His wife found out about the affair and filed for divorce." She also discovered that he had been embezzling from his company to fund his lifestyle with Marin. He's facing his own criminal charges. After Detective Collins left, I sat alone in my kitchen, holding my grandmother's necklace up to the light. The sapphires caught the morning sun and threw tiny blue rainbows across the white walls. 3 generations of women in my family had worn this necklace on their wedding days. It was supposed to go to Terrence's wife someday, but now I wondered if it might skip a generation and go to a granddaughter instead. The thought of future grandchildren no longer filled me with the desperate longing it once had. If Terrence found love again, if children came, I would welcome them, but I no longer felt like my worth as a person depended on being needed by others. The phone rang, and I saw Terrence's name on the caller ID. These calls still made my heart skip a little, but now it was with anticipation rather than anxiety. "Hi, Mom." His voice was warm, relaxed. "I was wondering if you'd like to have dinner tonight. I found a new recipe for that chicken dish you used to make when I was a kid." "You want to cook for me?" I asked, surprised. "I want to learn," he said. I realized I don't know how to make any of the foods that remind me of home. I thought maybe you could teach me. After we hung up, I sat quietly for a few more minutes, processing this small but significant shift in our relationship. For years, I had been the one reaching out, the one making efforts, the one trying to bridge the gap between us. Now, Terrence was doing the reaching, and it felt like a miracle. I spent the afternoon going through old photo albums, pulling out pictures of Terrence as a child that I wanted to show him tonight. Pictures of him learning to ride a bike, blowing out birthday candles, playing in the backyard sprinkler, evidence of a childhood filled with love, even if it hadn't been perfect. I found the pictures from his high school graduation, where he was grinning widely in his cap and gown, his arm around my shoulders. We both looked so happy, so proud. That was before Marin, before the manipulation and lies that had slowly poisoned our relationship. As I arranged the photos in a small album to give to him, I realized something profound had shifted inside me. The desperate need to be needed, the fear of being alone, the willingness to sacrifice my own well-being for the illusion of family harmony. All of that was gone. I was 70 years old, nearly broke, and had just publicly humiliated my son's wife at their wedding. By most measures, I should have felt like a failure. Instead, I felt free. That evening, Terrence arrived with grocery bags and a nervous smile. We spent 3 hours in my kitchen, working side by side as I taught him the secrets of my mother's chicken recipe. He asked questions about techniques, about ingredients, about the stories behind family recipes. But more importantly, he asked about me, how I was feeling, what I was reading, whether I needed help with anything around the house. For the first time in years, he saw me as a person rather than a problem to be managed. As we sat down to eat the dinner we had prepared together, Terrence looked across the table at me with an expression I hadn't seen in far too long. Simple, uncomplicated love. "Mom," he said quietly, "I owe you an apology, not just for believing Marin's lies, but for letting our relationship get so broken that she could manipulate us in the first place." I reached across the table and took his hand. "We both made mistakes, sweetheart. What matters is that we're here now." Later that night, after Terrence had gone home with a container of leftover chicken and a promise to call me tomorrow, I sat on my front porch in the old rocking chair that had belonged to my mother. The neighborhood was quiet, most families inside having dinner or helping children with homework. I thought about Marin, probably sitting in a jail cell somewhere, finally facing the consequences of years of manipulation and fraud. I should have felt vindicated, triumphant. Instead, I mostly felt sad for her. She had spent so much energy trying to steal a life that was never meant to be hers, when she could have built something real with the considerable intelligence she possessed. But my sadness for Marin was tempered by a deeper feeling of peace. She could no longer hurt my family. She could no longer poison the relationship between my son and me with her lies and manipulations. I pulled my grandmother's necklace from my pocket and held it up to catch the last rays of the setting sun. Tomorrow, I would put it back in my jewelry box, safe and secure. But tonight I wanted to hold it, to feel connected to the generations of strong women who had worn it before me. Women who had faced their own challenges, their own betrayals, their own moments of having to choose between being polite and being free. I had chosen freedom, and for the first time in 70 years, I understood what that truly meant. The wind picked up, rustling the leaves of the old oak tree in my front yard. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell chimed 8 o'clock. Another day was ending, and tomorrow would bring new possibilities. I rocked gently in my mother's chair, my grandmother's necklace warm in my palm, and smiled into the gathering darkness. I was exactly where I belonged. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below, and meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.